I came here to go to law school and lived near my mentor, J. Garrett Allen. I'd worked on a national blood program with him to increase the safety of the blood supply nationally by getting rid of post-transfusion hepatitis, which turned out to be a very successful project from '72 to '76. So I came out here. I admired Dr. Allen so much. He'd been the first head of the Stanford Medical School when it came down here in '59. And I went to the law school here, Stanford Law School. And then I was a member of the board of editors there and knew a lot of people and enjoyed public activities. I worked with the Environmental Law Society. I set up a consulting program at that time where I eventually worked in the EIR on the Truckee River, preserving the endangered species up in Pyramid Lake. And then I got a chance to be a teaching assistant, and then they asked me to be a consulting assistant professor at Stanford. That's an academic appointment, but not a tenure track. And I taught public policy, environmental policy, and health policy for 2 years at Stanford, '81 to '83. And I founded a group called Stanford for Environmental Education, which is still around. Now it's called Stanford for Environmental Action, I think. We helped develop the bins for recycling at Stanford. The idea there was to give something a daily activity that would tie their values into their daily activity and cause discussion to promote the environmental movement at that time, which was more nascent than it is today, when it's really quite embedded, as this wonderful building illustrates. So I taught for 2 years health policy, environmental policy, law and medicine. Got to meet a lot of people, taught, people lectured my class, from Don Kennedy and Victor Fuchs and Farquhar and Holman and Sachs and these people. And so I got very interested in health policy, and then I became a private practice attorney, which I've been for 28 years now. For over 20 years I've been involved in having my say when things were brought up. By coincidence, this is one of the major things I worked on some years ago with Ann Gray, and your photographer asked me of an aesthetically pleasing building to get my photo taken. My first choice was this building because it was brand new, it was Jim Baer's, it was LED, but obviously it's a newspaper, so it actually wasn't appropriate. But this was my next choice. Ann Gray had asked me to help her save that building, and then she and I and Noel Blaze were the three people basically who pushed it to the fore. And the Historic Commission people really thought it couldn't be saved, but Ann was a very nice lady. It was her grandfather's building, and it seemed reasonable to me to do it at the time the Palo Alto Medical Foundation was leaving. So by coincidence, they're having this big event on my birthday during the campaign. From time to time, my environmentalist students have asked me to come and testify before City Council on a topic, and lately, I suppose about 5 times in the last 20 years, I've tried to affect an issue before the council, environmental, historic preservation or something. And this year, there's many open seats, several people were running, several people I work for, Yuriko Kishimoto, Peter Dreckmeyer, were stepping down for different reasons. Gary Facino had asked and said he might run, and wanted more experienced people to run. I looked at the field. I wanted to make sure that there were at least 5 qualified people with a broad public service orientation and background and competency running. I called him, by the way, and he encouraged me to run. I didn't ask him to endorse me, but he encouraged me to run. And other people did too. And so I thought, well, maybe I can positively affect the debate. The issues that I see most important for me to focus on are the city spending issue, the amount of our budget, the number of employees, the relatively high salaries that have crept up. People should be paid fairly for their work. And historically, public employees are underpaid. But due to various structural changes of public unionization, mandatory arbitration, the political climate, and the downturn in the private sector, now public sector employees, I think by one Congressional Budget Office estimate, are 43% higher paid, including all their package of benefits, which is pension and medical too, than the private sector for comparable work. If that's a true statement, and I'm sure it's arguable, but probably in the right direction, there needs to be somehow a redressing of the balance. If public salaries double every 7 to 10 years, we're going to have some kind of train wreck. And so it's better to plan for it. City of Palo Alto is in relatively good shape. The state's billions and billions underwater on pensions. We're merely millions and millions underwater. And San Jose is probably tens of millions underwater. They just had to write a check for $50 million to the pension fund. Not because more people retired or benefits went up, but because an actuary, and I remember I was in a PhD program at mathematics at University of Illinois. I have a master's degree in statistics. I worked as a professional statistician at the Center for Advanced Computation. And there I worked with Dr. Bruce Hannon, who invented the bottle deposit bill for bottles and cans in the country, and wild and scenic rivers, and we just worked on different projects. My role was statistician. I believe a city government should have, like any other business, has to have a control of its costs and have planning. I don't believe it's stable, let alone in the taxpayers and the public's interest, to have a past obligation for pensions earned last year, you earn your pension year by year, to have an unknown and uncalculable future amount of pensions due. I believe we should focus on the pension issue first, even more important than wages and benefits with this round of negotiation. And I believe the goal, we should at least partly achieve this year, or the process will be a failure, is to have the city's pension contribution for each year finished at the end of the year. The pressures for increased spending come from this incremental budgeting by department, come from the negotiated wage increases and general inertia. I am concerned with the extent to which the City Council feels that it should be a philanthropic organization. I asked several City Council members, what limit is there on the city taxing people by force of law and just giving the money to anybody they want to? I can't find the answer to that question yet. We can give it to the senior games. Well, that's legitimate because they're here in town. We can give it to affordable housing. We can give it to, you can name 5 different kinds of organizations. I would say that there should be an objective criterion by which we're spending this money and we should try to see whether it accomplishes the goals or not. And I can't find the criterion. Well, let's take the senior games. We publicize them, but what about the senior games in 2005? Does everybody remember where they were and how much it improved the economy of that Southern Illinois? Right. So with housing, I think it would be better to have objective criterion for each of these things that are done. Also, I think that Palo Alto is a wealthy community. I think a private foundation could be encouraged to take over gradually. I don't think there should be any abrupt change in the funding of these very valued institutions. I noticed that Portola Valley contributed some very large fraction to build their town hall. It was donated. I believe in Palo Alto, if we had not passed if we had not finally passed a library bond that 2/3 supported, I think it would have been feasible to bring private people into play to build these things. But they're not going to, private people aren't going to donate millions or tens of millions if government's going to fund it. Why should they? But I believe, and the charity has worked out very well in like the holiday fund. These are terrifically important things, and you've been able to draw in private money. There is no shortage of money here overall between the government and the private sector. I think some of these things, there's a question whether children's theater should be a city-run activity where it got all kind of snarled up, or whether it should be a freestanding nonprofit that the city simply funds at a certain level and aren't going to expand at the same rate. Palo Alto, I think, has grown somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 people in the last 7 to 12 years, roughly. And it's not clear how much we can grow. I think the ABAG, Association of Bay Area Government, requirements for housing need to be readdressed in a public forum. We do need to provide more housing. It has to be something that's compatible with the area, that integrates with the people that are there, and is for the benefit of the residents. Ricky's Hyatt is an example of a housing project that kind of went sideways and didn't really leave anyone satisfied. And then also when we locate housing, we want to make sure that it not only meets some technical requirement of a ratio or a type of housing, but it's also we're putting people in there that are going to succeed in the environment they're in their own personal lives, that if they're near jobs or if they're near transit or they're in a neighborhood that they would otherwise live in. So I think having right-sized housing is going to continue to be an issue. I think increased housing development is going to happen and it should happen.